Thank you, TJ. And hello, everybody. I am glad that you are joining us this evening. I know that I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. Sorry we couldn't be in person, but I'm excited to be able to have this conversation virtually and for all of us to learn a little bit about finding scholarships and then winning those scholarships. So as TJ said, my name is Luis Otello. I'm from Doane University as a Vice President for the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen here so that you all can see my presentation. Let's see here. Okay, so how to find and win scholarships. So right now,
Real quick, Luis, sorry.
yep,
If you just want to go ahead and hit swap displays on that upper left hand.
okay,
There we go. Full screen looking great. Thank you so much.
perfect. Thank you, TJ. So how to find and win scholarships. So right now, you may be doing a little bit like this. You know, why do scholarships and their essays exist? Why can't people just give me that money? And really, scholarships are an opportunity for you to be able to fund your college education. So beyond the federal and state aid, such as loans and through your FAFSA, scholarships also make a college education possible. So the more scholarships that you win, the fewer dollars that are going to have to come out of your pocket. And their essays exist because I always say it's an affordable way for colleges and foundations and committees reviewing scholarships to get to know you, to understand your motivations, your dreams, and your qualifications. More or less what you did, especially the last 4 years of your high school career. So during this presentation, you will learn 3 steps: where to look for those scholarships, how to match your interests, talents, and strengths to the right scholarships, and how to apply research and writing elements to produce a winning scholarship essay. So when I was in high school, coming from a low income background, I knew that scholarships would be my way to be able to graduate college with as limited debt as possible. And so I started applying for scholarships, and what I learned through that process, I ended up winning thousands and thousands of dollars where college was more or less paid for. And so my hope today is to bring some of the tips that I learned doing that, and over, probably a decade now of helping other students win scholarships, both selective scholarships at the national level and those scholarships at the local level. All of these tips will apply to any of those. And so I'm excited for you to learn some of these tips and then use them so that you don't feel as overwhelmed, because you're going to know how this process works and then how to win those scholarships. So this is what I hope you all look like at the end of this presentation, because you're going to be so excited to get going on your work. So the first thing that I want us to cover is where to look for these scholarships. And oftentimes I will hear students say, oh, well, there's no scholarships for me. Let me reassure you right now, there are scholarships for everyone of all types of qualifications. You don't have to necessarily be even the top student at your school. There's scholarships for all types of causes, for all types of interest and talent. So know that it's about looking for them, just like you look for jobs. You are also looking for scholarships. So often when I hear that, there's not enough scholarships, what I'm actually hearing is I don't necessarily know where to look, or maybe I'm not as motivated to spend a lot of time searching for these scholarships. So my hope is that these options that I am sharing with you today will make that search a little bit easier. So where I would definitely start is Education Quest, Scholarship Quest, and national search sites, and the link is right there. So I would definitely spend quite a bit of time there. Scholarship Quest is one portal for state and local scholarships, and then you're going to find some of your national scholarships right below. And some of them will have you develop a quick account just so that they can narrow down the scholarships, because like I said, there are thousands of scholarships. But honestly, if you spend time in that link, there are so many scholarships. It actually takes days to be able to take a serious look at the descriptions of each of those scholarships to see which one meets your profile. The next area that I would also spend some time looking at is university-sponsored general and department scholarship sites. So every college that you apply to, go to their sites and look at their web page that has the scholarship listings. You will find those at the department level. So let's say you want to be an engineer, go to the engineering site. And if you don't see anything, you may even consider emailing the department chair or the dean within that department or that college to be able to see if there's any scholarships for you. So know that colleges and universities give thousands and thousands, in fact, millions and millions of dollars in scholarships. So know that even though you may pay them, they are also giving you money. And that's something that, may seem pretty basic understanding, but I have seen students who miss that opportunity to apply to scholarships that are ran by the university. Next, I would also talk to your school counselor or college advisors there for a list of scholarships that past graduates have won. I like saying past graduates have won because that also shows some of that track record that other students that may have similar profiles like you that have won those scholarships, so that that, these are very viable scholarships. I would even say, look at the senior night program that lists those scholarships. So every school, or not every school, but many schools will have a senior night where you celebrate your seniors and all the accomplishments. That's where also when they award some of their scholarships. So you will know where those scholarships are going, where the students are winning those scholarships, and you can actually start researching those. Community and national foundations are excellent resources as well. So you may have a local community foundation that you can go to and look at their listings there. There's also national foundations that you may take a closer look, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They give some scholarships. You can look at what those are. Local and national service organizations and nonprofits. You may have local nonprofits and they may be giving scholarships. They may not be huge scholarships. They may be 500 or 1,000, but those add up. Those help pay for books, or those pay for, an additional course that you are taking. So really think about all the different nonprofits and service organizations, maybe an Optimist Club that may have those scholarships and may not be using some of the listings that I've already described. Family, parent, or guardian employers are also an excellent opportunity. So I know that my parents, my father was working at Tyson Foods. So Tyson does give a scholarship for their students. Your parents, your guardians, any other family members may work at with other employers that also provide, just like the example that I gave in my story. So look for and ask. And I'll go ahead and say, if you don't see it, ask. Sometimes they may not even have one, but they may say, Luis, we don't really have that, but thank you for asking, because now we're going to consider starting one, and we'll let you know when that application is ready. The private sector companies also have scholarships, or more or less corporate America. So think about maybe even your favorite brands. You may find that they have scholarships for you as well. So this example that I'm giving, and one that I'm tied to just because it's one that I applied to and won, is a Coca-Cola Scholars Foundation. Organizations connected to curricular and extracurricular activities. So maybe you compete in speech and debate. Well, the National Speech and Debate Association may have some scholarships. You may compete in wrestling. You may find that there's an association also within wrestling that provides funding. So let me assure you that if you literally go to all of these different areas that I have just described, starting with Education Quest, Scholarship Quest, and National Search sites, there is no way you're going to be able to read through every description, because there are thousands of them. So know that you can find them there. The second step in this process is matching strengths with the scholarships you're applying to. Too often, I am seeing students applying for, let's say, a heavy service scholarship. So the scholarship is really wanting to see all the service activities that you did. with, you know, when the student maybe has done just very few hours of community service, right? So you can see that we're not matching the strengths with the description of the scholarship. Or you may be applying to a scholarship that is for student athletes, but let's say you only competed in one sport for one semester in one of your grades, right? So very minimal experience as a student athlete. That may not be the best scholarship for you to apply to. Because scholarships do take time, it's important that you do invest the time where you're going to likely get the most return for that investment. And so while you should apply for as many scholarships as you can, and that is a question I often get, how many can I apply to? As many as you want and you have the ability. But what I'm saying here is that it's important that you spend your time, just because there's thousands of scholarships you could apply to, that you spend your time where you're able to maximize those earnings. So let me just give you a quick example, a hypothetical example for you to see what I'm trying to explain here. So let's just take this Coca-Cola Scholars Program scholarship description. So right here, it says students are recognized for their capacity to lead and serve, as well as their commitment to making a significant impact on their schools and communities. So let's take, hypothetical examples. We have student John here on the left and student Chris here on the right. Let's say that they're both high school seniors when you apply for this scholarship and many others, although scholarships are available for students when they're juniors. Sometimes their scholarships are available when you're a middle school student, but a bulk of the scholarships you're applying for when you are a senior. However, the research should really start way before then. So let's take John. John started his own nonprofit organization in his community when he was like 15 years old, and he's been making an impact, raising thousands of dollars as a high school student, and then producing a lot of great outcomes for his community. He has great, scores, great academics. Chris has also great scores, great academics, but let's say he has played one sport throughout and he's done very well. And so at this point, let's say, who's most likely to win the Coca-Cola Scholars Program scholarship? Well, give you a quick second to think about it. Likely, the person that's matching their strengths with the scholarship in this case is going to be John. So John has selected more of the scholarship that goes with his profile than Chris. So if Chris applied for it, and maybe he should apply for it, but he may learn that for this particular scholarship, reading the description, it definitely states that the student has to make a significant impact on their schools and communities, right? So again, you want to find what you're really good at, and I know that all of you have something that you're good at, and apply to those types of scholarships. So that's just a quick example. Something that I always like to say is, if you apply to be a lifeguard at your local swimming pool, but you do not know how to swim, and someone who does know how to swim is applying for the position, they're likely going to take the individual that knows how to swim, because the job requires that you know how to swim. Think about it the same way when you're applying for scholarships. Match what you're good at, your strengths, with what the description is saying. Now, that does take time, and that does take investment in trying to read and match up. But ultimately, when you select those and apply to those, you're likely going to have an increased chance of winning those scholarships than if you just apply blindly to any scholarship, regardless of what the description is. Okay, now we're going to get into the step number 3 in this process. And in fact, I would consider step 1 and 2 that you do together. And then step 3 is after you identify those and start looking at your scholarships. So applying the research and writing elements. So you can see the process here where you research the prompt, you develop your concept, you outline, you write, you revise, and edit. During this moment, we're going to go through each one of those components so that you understand what you should be looking for. Okay, so researching the prompt. The prompt is a question that you get in the is a question that is included in the essays of what you're going to be writing about. Okay, so don't let that word scare you. It's more or less just the question that you're being asked to answer. The essays, real quick, in a scholarship application is a scholarship application will likely include that you submit a resume. They'll include just your basic demographic information, what school you're going to, your grades, and then it's going to likely include your essays. And so the essays are really to complement everything else you submit. So as I'm talking about this, think about how your essay enhances your application, that it doesn't necessarily repeat. I'll give you an example in a little bit where I share how if you more or less just repeat everything that your resume, your grades share in your essay, you're not really enhancing your application. You're more or less just repeating what the review committee has already learned about you. So I'll share more about that in a bit. So the research prompt, you want to ask these questions when you start looking at applications. What is the question asking, and what is the review committee trying to learn about you, right? So you want to understand, why are they asking you this question? Because the more that you understand why they're asking that question, the more you can tailor the content of your essay for what they are looking to learn about you. And I'll give an example here in a little bit. Why are they trying to learn that information about you? And then what is the purpose of the essay in this application? Okay, so again, making sure that you understand what the essay is contributing towards your entire application that you have submitted. So let's look at a quick example here. So let's say that the research prompt is, how have you been a leader in high school? Now, trust me, a lot of scholarship applications have this question. And so that's why I include it here. So let's just think of yourself as applying to two different scholarship committees. One, let's say, is a state student athletic organization, and the other one is a state volunteer service organization. And they both have the same prompt. So if we think back to our question, what are they trying to learn about me? Do you think that you should submit the same exact essay to both organizations because they have the same prompt? The answer really should be no. Now, could there be elements that you include for both? Yes. But ultimately, you're applying to two different audiences, and that's what's important here. And that's where, you'll hear me say throughout this presentation, is that audience matters. There's real people who are reading your applications. And so you want to make sure that you reach your audience. Those audiences have feelings. They have emotions. They have, they believe in your potential. And so you want to be able to share a story with them that also gets buy-in from them so that they can invest in you. So here, the State Student Athletic Organization may want to see more of your leadership abilities within your athletic career. The State Volunteer Service Organization may want to see more of your leadership within service, within your community, within your school, right? So there may be two angles. If you're not quite sure which one is which in terms of what type of content, sometimes you can just pick up the phone and give them a call and say, hey, I know that your question is, how have you been a leader in high school? Is there a particular area you're wanting me to focus on? Do you want me to focus more on school service or community service? Or are there any particular areas that you want me to spend most of my time describing? This is important because so many of these essays have word limits. So some might be 500 words, others may be 1,000, but most of them are within that range. And so you do not have a lot of time to go in depth. And so understanding exactly what type of content they're wanting to see allows you to tailor again towards your audience. So hopefully now you understand that even when you have the same prompt, having different essays is important because you're able to more effectively reach that audience that is in front of you. Okay, now let's talk about developing the concept and what I mean by developing the concept. And more or less, developing the concept is understanding what are the general or the broad strokes that you're going to be placing in your essay. And there's 3 A's that I want you to keep in mind as you think of the content that will ultimately make the pages that you submit for these scholarship essays. The first one is authenticity. If you are being the most real about who you are, what you're about, that is going to come through. You can tell when a student is more or less just, writing what they think others need to hear, or writing a different version of themselves. Your most authentic self is the best version for scholarships. The second one is asset advantage. What I mean by this is scholarship processes are competitive processes. Even if there's only 10 applications versus, the Coca-Cola Scholars Program had 88,000 when I applied for 250 slots. And so, but even your local scholarship, you may still have 10, 20, 100 students for only 1 or 2 slots. So ultimately, scholarships are competitive. And so the asset advantage is thinking about assets as what are your strengths, right? So write your scholarships that are directly bringing out those strengths, what makes you unique, and something that maybe other students may not necessarily be talking about. Again, that's why it's your personal advantage. It's your asset advantage, because you're taking your experience throughout high school and deciding what's most important in my story that may have a greater chance of competing with other experiences from other students. So that's why it's asset advantage. The third one is alignment accuracy. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of when you match with your scholarships, is you want to align the content with the question. So many students actually do not respond to the question. So aligning your content to the question is going to be important. And the student that does it with, that shows the most impact. So going back to that question about, how have you been a leader during your high school years, you're wanting to make sure that you think of the examples that are most impactful, because the more impactful your examples are, the more accurate they're going to be in responding to that question. So those 3 A's are incredibly important. And sometimes students ask me more questions on this, so I encourage you to ask me at the end of the presentation if you need me to explain any of these 3. But I think these 3 are absolutely critical to you being able to rise to the top in a competitive process. Now let's talk about the outline of your essay. So we all know, or you may not, and so in Hollywood, you do storyboarding for those wonderful films that we watch that captivate our feelings, that take us places, that take us on a journey. Your essays should also be able to captivate your audience. And so outlining and even using an example like this, like a storyboard of how you want to illustrate your essay, is something that students have found helpful. If you're not much of a drawer or a creative person, that is fine. You can also just list it out as to how you want to start after you have your concept of what you're going to include in your essay, how you want to start, what's the middle going to look like, and what's the end going to look like. And just kind of have a general idea of what journey you're going to take your application reviewers on, okay? But what I see is if students do not take the opportunity to look at what journey they're going to be taking their audience on, you can tell in their essays that they just kind of sat down and just started writing and just kind of let it go. Now, you can do that, but still have a understanding and recognize that organization of what things to describe first and what goes next does provide you a certain advantage in this process. So I would definitely consider becoming your own Hollywood writer and starting the storyboard so that you can visualize where you're going to be taking your audience. All right, now we are in the writing process of the of applying for scholarships. So there are 6 writing elements that I want to cover. Normally, if we were able to be in person, you would have examples of essays that I would give you. You would have a chance to read those and then be able to rank them so that you're able to yourself see a varying quality of essays and start understanding, what do winning scholarship essays look like, and what are those that kind of sink to the bottom look like. And so we don't have the capability to do this now, but I hope to still be able to give you some examples so that you can understand how to apply these 6 writing elements as you begin writing your essays. The first thing that I will also say before delving into those is that it's important to while we often learn the 5-paragraph method in writing essays, know that that's not necessarily the style that's going to be the most conducive to captivating your audience that you're applying the essays to in these situations. So the 5-paragraph essay may not always be the best way when you are applying for these scholarship essays. And I know I'm a former English teacher, so if there's other English teachers around, I know sometimes that can make us nervous, but trust me, in this process, when you are trying to win the hearts and minds of those reviewers, that 5-paragraph essay ends up being a little too blocky and doesn't allow the reader to fully immerse themselves in this writing. So the first element is uniqueness. So I'm going to give a quick example here, but uniqueness is essentially, could someone else write that story? If another student could write the exact same story, what I say is, let's start back over and understand what really makes you unique. And trust me, you all are unique. You all are complex human beings who bring a lot of talents to what you do. And so I know you can find what is it that makes you you. And I've worked with hundreds of students, and they initially say, Mr. Sotelo, I don't have anything that's unique about me. I don't have anything that makes me special. And all I have to say is yes, there are many things that make you special. It may take some time to analyze what's the things that are unique about you, but I trust me that you can find that. So let's just give a quick example of something that would not necessarily qualify as unique. And this is just a quick excerpt of, let's say, an application that was submitted as to, why do you want to get into the Air Force Academy? So this student here says, I would like to attend the Air Force Academy because I want a good college education. I also want to learn to fly, become a military officer, and serve my country. So what I would share with Tom in this situation is those are all admirable and wonderful things. Where this essay would start falling apart is that every other student who is applying to the Air Force Academy is likely going to have the same type of vision. So this student it's harder for this student to rise to the top of the scholarship applications if they're sharing pretty much what others are also applying for. So it's not very unique. So just take a quick second, read it yourself. It's pretty much something that any student applying would likely say. Okay, now let's look at more or less a revamped. And this is just one example. There's many ways of writing essays, but this will give you an understanding of how now it's a lot more unique and a lot more engaging of an essay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off. My friend Eric pushed the button and a rocket about as long as my forearm and less than half as wide whooshed into the sky. It almost disappeared from view before we saw the opening of a small white parachute that would bring it safely back to Earth. Eric and I shouted in excitement as we sprinted toward the landing site as fast as our 11-year-old legs would move. Another successful launch by the founders and only members of the Linden Street Junior Birdman Club. All right, now we get a taste for who Tom is. You can see here the difference between one that really applies a uniqueness element and one that does not apply the uniqueness element, right? So you can consider what you saw initially, the first draft, and here we have a second draft, where we know that this student was really engaged in love, at least love for flying since he was pretty young. So that's what that communicates to me. All right, let's move on to the next element you should consider. And these first two elements are really the ones where I see students ability to rise to the top in those the stacks of applications is through these two elements especially. All of them are important, but I really urge you to consider these two here. Single focus. What I mean by this is that when I read scholarship essays, and I've read hundreds, probably thousands at this point, those applications that don't necessarily rise to the top, what ends up happening is they try to cram everything from their high school career into their essays. And ultimately, that's why we have a resume most often, is to be able to understand your history within your high school career. So I don't need you to more or less give me a resume in prose by writing your essays and telling me everything that you did. And so this example gives you an understanding of what I mean when you disguise your essays as more or less your resume. Here it goes. I am generally enthusiastic about activities, and this enthusiasm has added a lot of life to the school atmosphere. In addition to academic achievements, I have developed a strong sense of leadership. This is evident in the positions I have held during the past 4 years as elected representative to the school government, captain of the lacrosse team, co-chair of the Assembly's committee, and editor-in-chief of the yearbook. Wow, so this student is heavily involved, right? But the issue is that I likely read the resume at some point in the application. So this doesn't allow me to actually learn more about the student's motivation, what they're about, who they are as students, what drives them. It more or less just gives me a resume in prose. I just am reading more or less what they did. And so what I would advise this student to do is pick one or two of those activities where, again, where you can align, alignment accuracy, what I said as to how to think of your content, your concept, is think about where if I were this student, where did I have the most impact? Where did I make the most difference? Where did I have the best outcomes, essentially? Let's say it was as editor-in-chief of the yearbook. Let's say it was a report that was an article that I wrote that actually led to an investigation that uncovered, all these things that then allowed, the school to function better. Just made that up. So that's going to be much more impactful because it shows the depth and the drive and the intelligence and the creativity that it took to be able to do that. Versus, let's say, the school government, where maybe you were just a representative, you really didn't do much, you planned prom, and that's all you did. And so that's not showing as much of in-depth as this other experience that student may have had, okay? So the single focus is focusing. I always say, if life was a proportion of a cake, give us a thin sliver of your story during that essay. Because again, if you only have 500 to 1,000 words in most of these essays, the more in depth that you can give us, the more we're going to get to know you versus just knowing a bunch of titles and a bunch of buzzwords like I'm a good leader, I'm good at communication. Show us, be able to show us, not just be able to give us titles and again, buzzwords. So hopefully that's giving you a little bit more understanding of the single focus. The last thing I will say with the single focus is there are some applications that have you answer multiple questions in one cohesive essay. An example of this would be Nebraska's Buffett essay. The Buffett scholarship, at least from about a year ago, I don't know if it's been modified now, but it will have a series of questions, yet they are going to want you to more or less write one cohesive story, or essay, I should say. And so in those cases, what I say is still try to have a thread that shows who you are as a cohesive individual versus touching on each one individually. And so in that area, you may have more than one area of focus, but you're still able to go in depth with each one and still able to thread that story throughout. Okay, the next element that you should consider is the structure. So don't overthink this. This is one where I see students really overthinking, like, how do I start? What's my middle? Where do I go next? I just say, follow any of these two. There's likely more, but I just say these two have proven to be quite effective. Chronological, so the beginning of more or less the story and the end. So just like you would watch most movies where there is a beginning and end where they kind of go, one after the other, what happened next and then what happened next, that works. Or cause and effect. So perhaps there was an event, and then what was the impact of the event, of that event? What learning did you gain from that event? Or, what actions did you take because of this particular event? So any of those two structures will work just fine when you are considering how to go about writing your essay. The opening. So the opening, I believe, is pretty important. Just think about like a commercial that you've seen on television recently. You're likely going to watch the entirety of those commercials that capture your attention from the start, right? Otherwise, you may go into the kitchen and then just come back when your show is back. Although I know you younger folks don't have to worry as much because you have the on demand and you can just kind of skip right through and watch a new one through Netflix and Hulu. So I understand that this example is a little outdated and I'm now showing my age. But if you had to watch a commercial, those that you are captivated from the beginning are the ones that you're going to continue watching versus one that just starts out boring from the beginning, then you're not going to be as excited to continue watching throughout. Same here, because, and I'll give a quick note that oftentimes, especially the more competitive that the application is, the scholarship application is, meaning that there's more students applying for that, you're likely going to have more content to submit, and also the reviewers may have less time to review your application. So again, if you're able to make that reviewer kind of stop and really read, that's what's important. And that starts with the opening. So there's different types of openings that you can take. The academic one really starts with the who, what, when, where, why. So answering any of those questions. Quick note on this. I would stay away from asking questions as you're opening to your essays. I just have seen those not be the most engaging. And I would also stay away from using just a quote from someone famous that you want to start, because what happens is I often see a quote and then you just start it, right? And it's what it's giving me a sign is that you're a little nervous of how to start this essay, and so you start with someone else so that you can just kind of get through the opening, right? Don't do that. Like, go back to your authenticity. You all have stories to share, so make it a little bit more personal to your story, and avoid asking questions, especially those that can be answered quite quickly. If you're asking an extremely complex question, then maybe it makes sense. But the question method, the quote method of quoting someone like a famous person or someone who's completed a great cause in our world, those have not been the most effective. Now, obviously, if the essay is answering a prompt to a quote, then maybe you may add it. But again, because it's already in the prompt, even in that case, it may not be the most beneficial. The action type of opening takes the reader into the middle of action sequence. So what we saw with the Tom example earlier, that would be an action opening where literally we were sucked right into the action of what was going on in his life at that moment. Dialogue, it takes reader into action, but with dialogue. So it's similar to the action one, but there may be a little bit of dialogue between, let's say, a parent and a student. My only word of caution here is make sure that dialogue only goes for maybe two back and forth, three at the most. You don't want to have a whole script and then starting your essay. So that's important. But the dialogue does allow, especially if that dialogue, the words of that dialogue are pretty impactful in your life and change sort of the course of your life, or influence you. then include those, but again, not too long. The fourth one is a societal statement, and you start with a societal observation. Okay, so it could be any statement about society that you want to start with that kind of is bold. You can start with something like that. The last one is personal, takes the reader into your mind. Often those will start with I statements, and you will see those quite often. So I would say you can use those as well, where you really go into your own mind, what's going on, and use I statements at that point. Okay, so those openings are important. Those students that are able to captivate the audience with a creative opening are going to have a greater chance of keeping your audience more engaged, versus if you start with like a question, maybe I'm going to skim it more than had you actually captivated me from the beginning. And that's also important, because if, there have been times when I've been on review committees and I've read, 100 applications that consist of the resume, the school profile, your test scores, your demographic information, and then 7 essays. And imagine 100 of those applications in one day. Reading those, it's highly appreciated when students can be creative and really pour themselves in, because that investment pays off. With, if I'm on application number 70 in that day, I'm going to be, wow, okay, now it kind of wakes me up from reading so much content during this review process. That's why I focus on that opening and encourage you to do so as well. All right, we're almost to the end here, and then we can get to your questions. Tone and style. So I have come across many essays that will try to do sort of your researcher type of voice, where it's, what we're taught, where we don't use I, where we don't use we. It's more or less using even like the word one, like one may think. And what I want to encourage you here is use your voice. Unless the essay says, give me an excerpt of research writing, that's different. You want to follow the instructions. So anything that I share here, you want to follow their instructions, and people can get very particular. And I've seen scholarships literally even tell you what side of the, when you submit your packet, what side of the paper clip needs to be. So know that they follow what the scholarship application says, but most of them, you're not going to be asking for a researcher voice. And so you want to use I statements. You want it to be your story. Next element is sentence variety. So the research here is clear that individuals are much more engaged in your writing when you have a variety of sentence lengths. So with my students that I've worked with, I will actually have them write the number of words in each sentence throughout their entire essay. So if it is like literally 6, 6, 6, 6, 10, 6, I'm going to say, hey, let's think about making this so that maybe you have a sentence that has 6, you have one that has 15, you have one that has 5, right? You get a variety in that sentence structure. And again, because it's real humans reading your essays, at least up to now, I'm sure maybe in the future there may be some robots, but for right now, it's actual humans reading most of these essays. And so the more engaging you can make it, the increased chances that your essay and your scholarship application is going to rise to the top. Word choice is also incredibly important. I will often go, and as I'm editing students' work, it's looking at those words that is that the best descriptor for what you're trying to say, or is that the word that is most aligned with what you are trying to say? And so, yes, you're like, Luis, that takes a lot of time. Yes, it does take time, but you know what? Like winning $10,000, $20,000 is also really nice. And so the word choice, I cannot share enough how it makes a difference in making your message come to life. Avoid cliches. So I cannot tell you how often I am reading things, and I alluded to this earlier, where it is, I am an excellent leader. And that's all that I learn. There's no examples, there's no evidence, right? And so that's wonderful. I want to believe you that you're an excellent leader, but I also want examples of that shows me, not just tells me, but shows me, gives me that evidence that you actually are an excellent leader. I'm an excellent communicator, or just watch those types of words, that might be words that are everyone else is using, or phrases that is not giving us evidence as to what you're about. And finally, the transitions. So I would, for the best to your ability, is avoid trying to use those highly academic transition words like however, or thus, or moreover. Those again puts us back into a research mindset versus like you being able to share your story. So think about, and that's why that storyboarding and outlining is so important, because it allows you to already place things the way that they naturally happen versus you trying to force a transition. But what you definitely want to avoid is that your paragraphs don't just jump into a completely new subject without some form of easing into it, because it takes the reader away from that, sort of your content, and now they're starting to think of your writing. Okay, the best essays make me forget that I'm reading an essay. So you want to try to accomplish that. And finally, the closing. You don't want to summarize like you do in a 5-paragraph essay. So this is where I said I would come back to it. The 5-paragraph essay often, will often say, I'm going to share this. And then you do share it. And then at the end you say, I shared this. Well, again, because essays are so short, you likely don't need to remind your reader of what they learned, because they literally just learned it. So you don't want to try to summarize that in the sense of like telling them what you shared. What you may consider, and there's many different options, I'm just giving you a few here, is consider the full circle. So going back to the content from the intro, in the sense of, if you started, let's take Tom, if you started with this action of, as an 11-year-old flying this rocket, maybe you can go back to something of how that story ended at the end to give it full circle. And again, because we are humans and we love reading good stories that have, that share also what you learned, the impact that it had in your life, how you've impacted others, that's going to be the most impactful. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Again, we have very limited time to describe what I believe is actually a pretty involved process, not difficult, just involved. There's many steps to it that come together to make an excellent scholarship application. But we'll stop there with the time that we have so that we can answer some of your questions. And thank you so much for giving me the chance to engage in this conversation with you.
That was an excellent presentation. We have a couple of questions here, Luis. Can I begin applying for scholarships in 11th grade?
Yes. So there may be scholarships that you can apply to as an 11th grader. Like I said earlier, most of them, though, are going to be when you are a 12th grader. So what I would recommend, and what I often say, some that have come before are, for example, those that may be sometimes, let's say in the athletic world, they may have money attached to a certain competition. So let's say your team won this, or you as an individual runner won this, then you may be winning scholarships before you get to senior year, or maybe you were in a speaking contest. Then that will get you scholarships beforehand. I know, for example, I believe it's a Prudential Scholarship Foundation. They also have, if you did a lot of community service when you were a middle schooler, you can apply and get scholarships even as a middle schooler. But most of them are going to be your senior year. I will highlight here that it's important that you start researching that first step that I mentioned, the first and second step. You want to actually, so that you don't find yourself overwhelmed with so many scholarships to look through, to match yourself with, that you start at minimum the summer before your senior year. Now, if you're a senior right now listening to this presentation, you're like, oh my gosh, I haven't even started thinking about it. Don't worry. What that means is that you will need to block some time to actually go through and find those scholarships, maybe on the weekends, whenever you may have more time. So you're just going to have to cram a little bit more of it while you're also studying versus in the summer where maybe you had a little bit more time. That's why I say earlier, some will be in the fall of your senior year, and then a lot of them will be in the spring. And watch all of those different categories that I mentioned, from community foundations to the colleges themselves to national scholarships. They will have deadlines that literally are going throughout the entire year. So just watch those. There's a spreadsheet that I use with my students to help them kind of keep track of which ones are coming first and what elements they have, so that they can kind of keep it all together, because it is a pretty involved process.
All right, excellent. Let's see, another question here. How early should they begin writing scholarship essays?
I would say that at minimum, um, if you want to go through this entire process as I've described it, you're probably going to want at least a month. But it's going to really depend on how involved you are. But if you really want to be able to like write a draft, kind of let it sit, come back to it, just and do some more editing, revisions, I would say about a month. But obviously I will admit there were scholarships the essays that I completed literally minutes before they were due. Now, I do not recommend that, because those essays are not as well written as the ones where I took at least a month to be able to process, because you can't like give your full authentic self if you don't have time to kind of just let it sit and come back to it and say, does this sound like me? So I would say give yourself at least a month. If you want to be even more relaxed, then give yourself 2 months. There's never enough time that you can actually, once you have the prompt, you can begin researching that prompt, understanding your concept, and go from there.
Okay, great. And let's see. What all can you use scholarships for? I hear you talking about books, but do you choose where the money goes, or does it depend on the scholarship?
Great question. So it's going to depend on the scholarship. Some scholarships may be much more flexible, where some may even just give you the money and you decide how you do that. But fewer do that. The bulk of the scholarships that I come across are ones that go directly to the college. And so the college will apply it to any remaining balance of your tuition, any of your balances. So maybe even after you pay tuition, you could maybe apply it to your books. So I would say that anything that most of the scholarships are going to go directly to this university or college that you're studying at, and then they will funnel that into your account. And if there's remaining money, or maybe you can say, I want some of this for books, you can do that. But again, know that most of it will go directly to the college.
Okay. I am graduating at the end of my junior year. Does this have any consequences in terms of scholarships or paying for college?
Yeah, so essentially, you would follow the timeline that you would follow as if you're a senior. And so, because I would assume that maybe you would, even though you're graduating within junior year, you would have like a senior year standing in terms of curriculum. And so you would apply the same timeline as if you were a senior in that case. The cycle, let's say if you're graduating in December, that may mean that some scholarships, that you're just applying for some scholarships even after you graduate. And in fact, I would say you can continue applying for scholarships your entire college career. It doesn't just have to be your senior year. You can continue on into your first year, second year, et cetera, of college, and even into grad work.